Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series of lessons on the Cold War. And what we're going to be looking at this time is what made the wartime alliance completely unravel. So, the wartime alliance, World War II, that friendship between America, Britain, the USSR, Russia, they're working together to defeat Hitler. And we know they've met for three conferences. So Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam. We remember it as Thank You, Please. And we know there have been a lot of tension already. Even though we're right at the start of the course, they're supposed to be friends, they're working together. We've seen there's lots of tension. What we're going to look at in this lesson is what happens to make the rest of the world realize that there's tension. So we know there's tension. As far as the rest of the world's concerned, they're fine. They don't have any issues. They're getting on okay. We're going to see what makes it obvious to everyone that there are serious problems between these countries. So by the end of the lesson, you will understand three events that added to the tension between America and the USSR. So just pause the video for a moment. Have a look at this cartoon. So it was published after the bomb had been tested, the atomic bomb. Test was done the day after the Potsdam Conference began in July 1945. And just have a go at answering the questions. Okay, so let's look at it. So why is the cartoon entitled The Big Fourth? Well, you might have remembered that the leaders of those countries were called the Big Three. So America, Britain, Russia, known as the Big Three. Churchill, remember, gave it the title of the Grand Alliance, which sounds a lot better. So they're known as the Big Three. So the atomic bomb being called the Big Fourth, it's like the fourth important person there at the talks. And what do we notice about its shadow? The atomic bomb is casting a shadow on where it says Big Three. So it's suggesting that there is a shadow being cast over that meeting of Potsdam, that the Big Three are negotiating with the shadow of the atomic bomb there, influencing their decisions. So, how did the atom bomb impact on US Soviet relations? So, America is the only country to have atomic weapons for 4 years. The Soviets develop it in 1949. As the bomb is so destructive, it makes both sides reluctant to go to war. So it's not like starting a conventional war with guns or artillery. They know that if they start a nuclear war, it's going to be huge. It's going to be absolutely devastating. So they don't want to do it. Instead, what they want to do is outdo each other. So developing a new, more powerful weapon that makes the other side back down. And what that's called is an arms race. So a race to build up the best weapons or arms. So arms in this sense means weapons. So to arm yourself, to give yourself a weapon. So we get the weapons race, the arms race. Also, there's going to be tension over the satellite states. So remember, we've looked at these before. So in the agreements at Yalta and Potsdam, what had been agreed about Eastern Europe? So pause the video and write it down. So if we remember, they agreed these countries will come under the Soviet sphere of influence. It would be the Soviets' business. So it's up to the Soviets what happens, or Russia, what happens in Eastern Europe. So for Stalin, this meant they'd be led by politicians loyal to him. So the reason he wants this, he wants protection for Russia from future land attacks. So a buffer zone from the USSR, for the USSR from the West. And we can see, we keep coming back to this map because it's super important. So the Soviet Union there in red, and then in pink are the satellite states. So they're called satellite states in the way that satellites orbit planets. the satellites here are surrounding the Soviet Union. So satellite states: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Eastern Germany. And the Soviets want this as protection. It's like a shield or a buffer against the West. So if you want to invade the Soviet Union, you have to go through the satellite states first. So all of that together leads to tension. So the atomic bomb, the Soviets controlling Eastern Europe, tension is growing. And then it's going to get a whole lot worse. Thanks in part to a speech and also to two telegrams. So telegrams we don't really use anymore. Telegrams, very simply, is like a really early email. I mean, that's very simple. Um, if you want to go and sort of research telegrams, you might have seen them in films. I'm sure they can explain it better than I can. But for the purposes of this video and for the Cold War, all you need to know about telegrams is that it's a message system. So telegrams, early messages. So it's all about to kick off thanks to this guy, George Kennan. So he's the American ambassador in Moscow. So an ambassador is just someone who represents their country. So he lives in Moscow. He's American. He represents America. So say you're the British ambassador to Paris, you'd be British, you'd go, you'd live in Paris, and you would just represent Britain in any talks. So Keenan's living in Russia, representing America. In February 1946, he sends a really long message from his home in Russia back to America. So it's known as the long telegram. So long in the sense of he goes on a lot. So it's sometimes also called the Keenan telegram. So Keenan telegram, long telegram. So what he says in the message, he's basically talking about Stalin negatively behind his back. So he said Stalin wanted to destroy capitalism. Stalin thinks the outside world wanted to destroy communism, possibly because Truman's been stomping around telling everyone how much he hates communism. I mean, he's not wrong. Keenan also said he thought Stalin would back down if he faced strong resistance. So Keenan is basically saying to America, if you go in tough with Stalin, he will crumble. So he's encouraging America to be really harsh with Stalin, to take a hard line with him. Stalin, not surprisingly, is furious about this, bearing in mind they're supposed to be friends. Stalin did an awful lot, Russia did an awful lot to help in World War II to fight the Nazis. They are supposed to be on the same side, and there the Americans are sending this horrible message. Soviet media start to represent the USA as warmongers. Why is their ambassador telling America about Stalin will back down if he gets like a really strong resistance? Why would you say that if America's going to be their friend? So it really doesn't help matters. What ideally would happen here is America would apologize to Russia and they'd be like, Stalin, we're so sorry. And they kind of would have eased the tension. Instead, Truman is very much like, but I don't like communism and we have the atomic bomb, so who cares if they have hurt feelings? Not very diplomatic. Speaking of not very diplomatic, we have Churchill. Now, Churchill, remember, is the ex-British Prime Minister. So he isn't directly involved in this dispute between America and Russia, but he's going to get involved. So Churchill has been used to be Prime Minister, and not just any Prime Minister during World War II. If you remember, by the time of the Potsdam Conference, he'd lost an election to Attlee. So he's got time on his hands. So he's on holiday in America. He's traveling around, he's meeting people, he's shaking hands, and along the way, he gives a speech, which is really undiplomatic. So it's called the Iron Curtain speech. So I won't read you the whole thing because it's quite long, but it includes this statement: from Stettin in the Baltic, that's a place, to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. So, what it means, so there's Stettin up there in the north, Trieste is down there. So he's saying there is an iron curtain. So a curtain's something that divides it. So he's saying east and west are divided, and the division, the curtain, is made of iron. So it's strong, it's hard to break. So what he's basically saying is East and West really hate each other publicly. Well done, Churchill. It really doesn't help as well. He says this whilst he's in America. So to the Russians, Britain has taken America's side. So this really flags up to the rest of the world that there are real tensions between America and Russia. So Churchill there stirring things up a bit. So then finally, we can kind of see this coming. So, with all of that going on, Nikolai Novikov, who is the Soviet ambassador in Washington, so he's a Russian who's living in America, sent his own telegram from America to Russia. So he told his government the Americans didn't want to cooperate, which they don't. Americans would go to war if called on to do so. He also said the Americans wanted to dominate the world with their military power. So there you have it. They have gone from being supposedly friends, but with some quiet tensions going on underneath that no one really talks about, to openly, publicly not getting on with each other. Right about this time, it would have been great if someone had just banged all their heads together and gone, for goodness sake, stop it. I don't care if you don't like each other, just leave each other alone. Sadly, that doesn't happen, and we're going to have decades more of Cold War. And that's what we're going to start looking at next lesson.